The smell of burning rice filled the small kitchen as Sarah Martinez dropped the wooden spoon, her hands trembling as she stared at the encrypted message on her phone. 3 words that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her quiet life as a Navy cook. Package compromised. Run. For 2 years, she had served meals to hungry sailors, believing her biggest challenge was feeding 400 people 3 times a day. She had no idea that every recipe she prepared, every meal she served, every ingredient she ordered was part of something much bigger than anyone could imagine. The woman who thought her most dangerous moment would be handling a sharp knife in rough seas was about to discover that her cooking skills had made her the most valuable asset in a classified operation that had just gone terribly wrong. The elite SEAL team she had been unknowingly supporting through her carefully crafted meals was now missing behind enemy lines. And the only person who could save them was the cook who had been hiding in plain sight all along, carrying secrets in her recipes that even she didn't fully understand. Sarah Martinez was about to learn that sometimes the most ordinary people are chosen for the most extraordinary missions, and that courage isn't always found on the battlefield. Sometimes it's discovered in the most unexpected places by the most unlikely heroes. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she checked the massive industrial ovens for the 3rd time that morning. The USS Intrepid was cutting through rough Pacific waters, and keeping 400 sailors fed was no easy task when a ship pitched and rolled like a mechanical bull. She had been serving as the head cook for nearly 2 years now, and she prided herself on never missing a meal service, no matter how challenging the conditions. The kitchen, or galley as they called on the ship, was her domain. Stainless steel surfaces stretched in every direction, interrupted only by the constant hum of refrigeration units and the rhythmic chopping of her kitchen staff preparing vegetables for lunch. Sarah had started this job thinking it would be temporary, a way to pay off student loans while figuring out what she really wanted to do with her life. She never expected to fall in love with the organized chaos of feeding hundreds of people every day. Her specialty had become creating meals that not only filled stomachs, but actually tasted good, which was no small feat given the limitations of military rations and the challenges of cooking at sea. The crew had started calling her Miracle Martinez after she somehow managed to turn processed meat and canned vegetables into something that reminded the sailors of home-cooked meals. What Sarah didn't know was that her reputation had reached far beyond the regular crew. 3 months ago, a small group of Navy SEALs had been quietly assigned to the ship for what was described as routine training exercises. These weren't ordinary sailors, and their mission was far from routine. The 8-member team, led by Lieutenant Commander Jake Harrison, had been tasked with a classified operation that would take them deep into hostile territory. The SEALs kept to themselves mostly, but Sarah had noticed them observing her cooking routines with unusual interest. They would ask specific questions about her ingredients, cooking times, and even the order in which she prepared certain dishes. At first, she thought they were just food enthusiasts, but there was something different about the way they watched her work. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had approached her one evening after the dinner service was complete. He was a tall man with weathered features and eyes that seemed to see everything. Sarah had served as type before, special operations soldiers who carried themselves differently than regular military personnel. "Martinez, I need to discuss something with you," he had said, his voice carrying an authority that made her stop cleaning the prep counter and give him her full attention. "Yes, sir." "Is there a problem with the meals?" she had asked, running through the last few days in her mind, wondering if she had somehow messed up something important. "On the contrary, your cooking has been exceptional. But I need to ask you about your background before you joined the Navy," Harrison had said, pulling out a tablet and showing her what appeared to be a detailed file about her life. Sarah had stared at the screen, seeing information about her childhood, her education, even details about her grandmother's recipes that she had never told anyone. The file contained photos of her family, including several of her grandmother Elena, who had taught her most of what she knew about cooking. "I don't understand, sir. Why would you need to know about my grandmother?" Sarah had asked, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's air conditioning. Harrison had studied her face carefully before responding. Your grandmother, Elena Martinez, wasn't just a cook, Sarah. She worked for the Office of Strategic Services during World War II. She was a code specialist who developed a system of embedding information in recipes. The cooking techniques she taught you, the specific combinations of ingredients she insisted on, even the order in which she taught you to add seasonings to certain dishes, none of that was random. The words had hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her beloved grandmother, who had spent countless hours teaching her to cook in the small kitchen of her childhood home, had been a spy. The woman who had patiently shown her how to make perfect rice, how to balance flavors in a stew, and how to read the doneness of bread by its smell had been carrying secrets all along. "That's impossible," Sarah had whispered. But even as she said it, she remembered strange things about her grandmother's cooking lessons. The way Elena had insisted on exact measurements for certain recipes, but was relaxed about others. How she had made Sarah memorize specific cooking sequences until she could perform them without thinking. The odd phrases Elena would mutter in Spanish while cooking, phrases that didn't quite make sense as cooking instructions. Harrison had nodded sympathetically. "We know this is a lot to process, but we've been monitoring your cooking for the past 3 months. You've been unconsciously using your grandmother's techniques, and we believe you've been embedding coded information in the meals you prepare for our team." Sarah had felt the ground shift beneath her feet, or maybe it was just the ship hitting another wave. "What kind of coded information?" "Intelligence that's crucial to our mission. Your grandmother's system was thought to be lost, but apparently she passed it down to you without you even realizing it. The way you season our meals, the combinations of ingredients you choose, even the temperatures at which you cook certain items, it's all following a pattern that matches classified intelligence we've been trying to transmit." The conversation had continued for another hour, with Harrison explaining how they had noticed correlations between Sarah's cooking choices and successful mission parameters. When she prepared fish with a particular herb combination, communications with headquarters were clearer. When she made bread with specific rising times, equipment functioned better. When she chose certain vegetables for the evening meal, the team's night operations were more successful. At first, Sarah had thought it was coincidence, but Harrison had shown her data spanning months. The correlations were too consistent to be random. Somehow, without knowing it, she had been supporting their mission through her cooking, using techniques her grandmother had embedded so deeply in her training that they had become second nature. "We need your help, Sarah," Harrison had said finally. "In 2 weeks, my team will be deployed on a critical mission. We can't tell you the details, but we need you to prepare our meals with specific intentions. We'll provide you with intelligence that needs to be embedded in our food using your grandmother's techniques." "But I don't know how to do that consciously," Sarah had protested. "If I've been doing it, it's been by accident." "That's where we're going to help you," Harrison had replied. "We have a specialist who studied your grandmother's methods. She's going to work with you to understand what you've been doing naturally and help you do it intentionally." The specialist had turned out to be Dr. Angela Chun, a quiet woman with a doctorate in cryptography and an unexpected passion for cooking. Over the following weeks, Dr. Chun had worked with Sarah during her off hours, analyzing her cooking methods and helping her understand the coded language her grandmother had taught her. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Dr. Chun had explained during one of their sessions. "She created a system where cooking instructions could carry multiple layers of meaning. The temperature at which you cook something might indicate coordinates. The order in which you add ingredients could specify timing for operations. Even the way you plate food could communicate tactical information." Sarah had been amazed to discover that many of her instinctive cooking choices were actually following complex patterns. The way she seasoned meat could indicate weather conditions. The cooking time for vegetables could communicate the status of equipment. Even her choice of side dishes could relay information about personnel and supplies. Learning to do consciously what she had been doing unconsciously was harder than Sarah had expected. It required her to think about cooking in an entirely different way, to see each meal as a message rather than just food. But gradually, she began to understand the elegant system her grandmother had created. The SEAL team had been preparing for their mission during this time, and Sarah had noticed changes in their behavior. They were more focused, more intense. They spent long hours in briefings and training sessions that she wasn't allowed to observe. She could see the weight of responsibility in their faces, especially in Lieutenant Commander Harrison's eyes. 2 days before the team was scheduled to depart, Harrison had approached her one final time. "Tomorrow night, you'll prepare our last meal aboard this ship," he had told her. "Dr. Chun will provide you with the final intelligence package. It's crucial that you embed this information correctly. Lives depend on it." Sarah had nodded, feeling the full weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. She was no longer just a cook. She was a crucial part of a classified operation that could affect national security. That evening, she had spent extra time in the galley, preparing for what would be the most important meal of her career. She had memorized the intelligence package that Dr. Chun had given her, understanding how each piece of information needed to be translated into cooking techniques. The main course would carry tactical information about their insertion point. The sides would communicate timing for different phases of the operation. Even the dessert would contain contingency plans in case something went wrong. As she had worked through the night, preparing everything perfectly, Sarah had felt her grandmother's presence with her. She could almost hear Elena's voice guiding her hands as she measured spices and adjusted cooking times. The old woman who had taught her that cooking was about more than just feeding people was finally revealing the true depth of her wisdom. The next morning, Sarah had served what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary breakfast to the SEAL team. But embedded in every bite was critical intelligence that would guide their mission. As she watched them eat, she felt a mixture of pride and terror, knowing that she had done everything correctly, but also understanding that these 8 men were about to risk their lives based partly on information she had hidden in their food. Lieutenant Commander Harrison had given her a small nod before leaving the galley, a gesture that told her the message had been received and understood. It was the last time she would see him and his team. That had been a week ago. Since then, Sarah had returned to her normal routine, preparing regular meals for the ship's crew and trying to process everything that had happened. Dr. Chun had remained aboard to monitor communications, though she spent most of her time in secure areas that Sarah wasn't allowed to access. Sarah had thrown herself back into her regular cooking duties, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of meal preparation. She had started to believe that her part in the classified operation was over, that she could go back to being just a cook who happened to have an unusual family history. But as she stood in the galley that morning, watching the rice burn while she stared at the encrypted message on her phone, Sarah realized that her involvement in this operation was far from over. The message was brief but terrifying. "Package compromised. Run." The phone had appeared in her locker that morning, tucked between her spare uniforms with a note that simply said, "Emergency contact only EC." Sarah had assumed AC stood for Angela Chan, though she hadn't seen the cryptography specialist in 2 days. Now, as she read the message again, Sarah felt her world shifting once more. The SEAL team was in trouble, and somehow she was still connected to their fate. The ordinary cook who had discovered her extraordinary heritage was about to learn that her story was far from over. She looked around the busy galley, where her staff continued their breakfast preparations, unaware that their head cook had just received a message that would change everything. Sarah took a deep breath, deleted the message, and began planning her next move. Whatever was happening to Lieutenant Commander Harrison and his team, whatever danger they were facing, she knew that her grandmother's legacy was calling her to action once again. The cooking skills that had been passed down through generations, the coded techniques that had remained hidden for decades, and the courage that ran in her family's bloodline were all about to be put to the ultimate test. Sarah's hands moved automatically as she salvaged what she could from the burned rice, her mind racing as she tried to process the implications of the message. Package compromised. The SEAL team was the package, which meant they were in immediate danger. But why was she being told to run? She was just a cook on a Navy ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Where exactly was she supposed to go? The answer came sooner than she expected. As she disposed of the ruined rice, her sous chef Martinez approached with a concerned expression. "Sarah, there's a woman here to see you. Says it's urgent," Martinez reported, lowering his voice. "She's not crew, and she's got that look, you know. like she's carrying bad news. Sarah's stomach dropped. She knew exactly who it was before she turned around. Dr. Angela Chun stood at the entrance to the galley, but she looked nothing like the calm academic who had spent weeks teaching Sarah about her grandmother's coding system. Chin's usually neat appearance was disheveled. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, and she carried an urgency that made everyone in the galley unconsciously step back. "Martinez, I need to speak with you privately." "Now," Chin said, her voice tight with stress. Sarah followed Chun to a small storage room adjacent to the galley, her heart pounding as she noticed how Chun kept looking over her shoulder, as if expecting to be followed. The cryptographer pulled the door closed and immediately began speaking in rapid, hushed tones. "The mission has gone wrong. Harrison's team was inserted into a terrorist compound in the Philippines 3 days ago. They were supposed to extract a high-value target and get out clean, but something went sideways. We lost contact with them 18 hours ago," Chin explained, her words tumbling together in her urgency to get the information across. "What does that have to do with me? I'm not military. I can't help with a rescue mission," Sarah said, though even as she spoke, she had a sinking feeling that she was wrong. "That's where you're mistaken," Chin replied, pulling out a tablet and showing Sarah satellite images of a compound surrounded by jungle. "The intelligence you embedded in their final meal included contingency plans for exactly this scenario. If the team was compromised, they were instructed to reach a specific safe house where they could lay low until extraction. The problem is we can't get a rescue team to them without knowing their exact status and location." Sarah studied the images, seeing what looked like a typical military compound with several buildings surrounded by high walls. But Chin zoomed in on one particular structure, a small building that looked different from the others. "This is the safe house. It's run by a local contact who's been working with us for years. But here's the crucial part. The only way to communicate with our people inside is through the same coded cooking system you've been using. The safe house contact expects to receive instructions through prepared meals, just like your grandmother did during World War II. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind, and she didn't like the picture they were forming. "You want me to go there? To the Philippines? To cook for a terrorist-controlled area?" "Not just cook," Chun corrected. "We need you to embed coded messages in meals that will be delivered to the safe house. The local contact will prepare the food exactly as you instruct, and Harrison's team will know how to read the intelligence hidden in their meals. It's the only secure communication method we have that won't be detected by the terrorists monitoring the area." Sarah sat down heavily on a crate of canned goods, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of what was being asked of her. "I'm a Navy cook, not a field operative. I've never been in a combat zone. I don't speak the local language. This is insane. You're also the granddaughter of one of the most effective intelligence operatives of World War II, and you've proven that you can use her techniques under pressure," Chin countered. "Sarah, there are 8 men trapped behind enemy lines who are counting on us to get them home. You're the only person who can communicate with them safely. Why can't you do it?" "You understand the coding system better than I do," Sarah protested, though she already suspected the answer. "Because I learned the system intellectually. You learned it instinctively. When you cook using your grandmother's techniques, you don't have to think about the codes. They flow naturally from your training. That intuitive understanding is what makes the coded information undetectable. If I try to replicate it, the artificial nature of my coding would be obvious to anyone who knew what to look for." Chin showed Sarah more photos, these ones showing the faces of Harrison's team. Sarah recognized each of them from the countless meals she had served them over the past months. There was Rodriguez, the team's medic, who always thanked her personally for the meals. Thompson, the explosives expert, who had once helped her fix a broken oven. Williams, the communications specialist, who had taught her some Spanish phrases during slow evenings. "They trust you," Chin continued. "When they see the coded messages in their food, they'll know the instructions are coming from someone who cares about getting them home safely. That trust could be the difference between a successful extraction and a disaster." Sarah looked at the photos again, remembering the last breakfast she had served them. They had all seemed confident, ready for whatever their mission would bring. Now they were trapped in enemy territory probably hungry, definitely scared, and relying on her to help save their lives. How would this even work? I can't just book a flight to the Philippines and start cooking in a war zone, Sarah said, though she could feel her resistance weakening. We have a cover story already prepared. You'll be traveling as part of a humanitarian food aid mission. The organization we're using as cover actually exists and does real work in the region, so your presence won't seem suspicious. The local contact who runs the safe house also manages food distribution for several refugee camps, so you'll have a legitimate reason to be teaching cooking techniques in the area. Chun handed Sarah a passport and travel documents. The passport showed her photo, but with the name Maria Santos, identified as a culinary specialist with the International Food Relief Organization. This is moving too fast, Sarah said, staring at the fake passport. I need time to think about this. We don't have time, Chun replied urgently. Every hour that passes increases the chances that Harrison's team will be discovered. The terrorists controlling that area are methodical in their searches. Our people are good at staying hidden, but they can't evade capture indefinitely. Sarah closed her eyes, tried to imagine herself in a foreign country, in a dangerous area, carrying the responsibility for 8 lives. It seemed impossible, like something that happened in movies rather than real life. But then she thought about her grandmother Elena, who had been even younger when she started working for the OSS during World War II. What did my grandmother do exactly during the war? Sarah asked. Chun pulled out another file, this one containing declassified documents from the 1940s. She operated behind enemy lines in occupied France. She worked as a cook in a restaurant that was frequented by German officers. For 3 years, she embedded intelligence in the meals she prepared for resistance fighters who worked in the kitchen with her. The information she passed helped coordinate dozens of successful operations against the Nazi occupation. Sarah looked at a black and white photograph of her grandmother as a young woman, standing in a restaurant kitchen with several other people. Elena looked confident and determined, nothing like the gentle grandmother who had taught Sarah to cook decades later. She was captured twice, Chun continued. Both times, she convinced her captors that she was just a cook who didn't understand what was happening around her. Her ability to appear completely innocent while carrying crucial intelligence made her one of the most effective operatives of the war. She never told me any of this, Sarah said softly, studying her grandmother's face in the photograph. After the war, operatives like your grandmother were ordered to maintain their cover for the rest of their lives. The techniques they developed were so effective that the government wanted to preserve the possibility of using them again. Elena was instructed to teach her methods to someone she trusted completely, someone who would never betray the secrets even if they didn't know they were carrying them. Sarah understood now why her grandmother had been so particular about teaching her certain techniques, why she had insisted on exact methods for specific dishes. Elena had been preparing Sarah for a possibility she hoped would never come to pass, but one she wanted to be ready for just in case. If I do this, what guarantee do I have that I'll come back safely? Sarah asked. None, Chun replied honestly. This is dangerous, and I won't lie to you about that. But you'll have support. We'll have people watching you, and the local contact has been doing this kind of work for years. Plus, your grandmother's techniques don't just work for embedding intelligence. They also work for appearing innocent and harmless. Sarah thought about the men trapped in the safe house, probably wondering if anyone was coming to help them. She thought about her grandmother, who had risked everything to fight against evil during World War II. She thought about her own comfortable life aboard the ship, where her biggest worry had been whether the evening meal would be ready on time. How long would I be gone? She asked. If everything goes according to plan, 1 week. Maybe 2 at the outside. You'll establish communication with the team, coordinate their extraction, and be home before anyone realizes you were gone, Chun explained. And if everything doesn't go according to plan? Chun was quiet for a moment before answering. Then we'll improvise, just like your grandmother did. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that she was about to make a decision that would change her life forever. She looked at the photos of Harrison's team one more time, then at the picture of her grandmother in wartime France. When do we leave? She asked. Chen's relief was visible. There's a supply helicopter leaving for Guam in 2 hours. From there, you'll catch a civilian flight to Manila, then a smaller plane to Mindanao. Our local contact will meet you at the airport. 2 hours? I need to pack, make arrangement for the kitchen, figure out what to tell my staff, Sarah said, feeling panicked by how quickly everything was moving. Your staff will be told that you've been called away for a family emergency. Everything else has been arranged. You'll find everything you need when you arrive, including cooking equipment and ingredients that will allow you to prepare the coded meals, Chen assured her. Sarah stood up, her legs feeling unsteady. In less than 2 hours, she would leave the safety and familiarity of the ship for a dangerous mission in a foreign country. She would go from being a cook to being an intelligence operative, using skills her grandmother had taught her without her even knowing it. There's one more thing, Chun said as Sarah reached for the door. Your grandmother left something for you. We've been holding it until we knew for certain that you would need it. Chun handed Sarah a small wooden box that looked very old. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a worn cookbook written in Spanish and English. But as Sarah flipped through it, she realized it wasn't just recipes. Hidden among the cooking instructions were coded notations in her grandmother's handwriting, techniques, and methods that went far beyond what Dr. Chun had taught her. On the first page, in Elena's careful script, was a note. For my dear Sarah, if you are reading this, then the world needs our family's gifts again. Cook with love, but remember that love sometimes requires courage. Your grandmother who loves you always, Elena. Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes as she understood the full scope of what her grandmother had prepared for her. Elena had not only taught her the techniques she would need, she had also left her a guidebook for using those skills in dangerous situations. She knew, Sarah whispered. She hoped you'd never need to know, Chen replied. But she wanted to make sure you were ready if the time came. Sarah closed the cookbook and tucked it safely in her jacket. In 2 hours, she would leave everything familiar behind and step into a world she had never imagined for herself. But she would not be going empty-handed. She carried her grandmother's legacy, her own newly discovered skills, and the determination to bring 8 good men home safely. The ordinary cook who had learned she was extraordinary was about to discover just how far that extraordinary nature could take her. The humid air of Mindanao hit Sarah like a physical blow as she stepped off the small charter plane. Even at 6 in the morning, the temperature was already approaching 90 degrees, and the humidity made her navy uniform cling uncomfortably to her skin. She had changed out of her military clothes during the flight, replacing them with the civilian clothing that had been waiting in her travel bag. She now wore simple khaki pants, a white cotton shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat that Dr. Chun had insisted would help her blend in with the humanitarian workers who frequented the region. The airport was smaller than any she had ever seen, just a single runway with a modest terminal building that looked like it had been built in the 1970s and never updated. Despite the early hour, the place was bustling with activity. Sarah saw aid workers loading supplies onto trucks, local merchants selling fruit and coffee to travelers, and what appeared to be several different military or security forces keeping watch over everything. Maria Santos, a voice called in accented English. Sarah turned to see a Filipino man approaching her, probably in his 50s with graying hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent working outdoors. He wore simple clothes similar to her own and carried himself with the relaxed confidence of someone who belonged in this environment. Yes, that's me, Sarah replied, remembering to use her cover identity. I am Carlos Mendoza with the International Food Relief Organization. Welcome to Mindanao, he said, extending his hand with a warm smile. I hope your flight was comfortable. As they shook hands, Carlos slipped her a small piece of paper. Sarah palmed it smoothly, a skill she didn't even remember learning, but which seemed to come naturally. Dr. Chun had been right about the instinctive nature of her grandmother's training. Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Mendoza. I'm looking forward to working with your organization, Sarah replied, playing her part while trying to read Carlos's expression for any sign of what was really happening. Please call me Carlos. We are not formal here. Come, Let me help you with your bags, and we will talk while we drive to the camp, Carlos said, leading her toward a battered pickup truck parked outside the terminal. As they loaded her luggage, Sarah unfolded the paper Carlos had given her. It contained just a few words: team secure, situation difficult, need communication today. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and renewed anxiety. Harrison and his team were alive and safe for now, but they needed help urgently. She climbed into the passenger seat of Carlos's truck, trying to prepare herself mentally for whatever was coming next. So, Amalia, Doctor. Chin tells me you are an expert in traditional cooking methods, yes? Carlos asked as they pulled away from the airport, his voice carefully neutral in case anyone was listening. Yes, I specialize in recipes that have been passed down through families, particularly techniques that preserve nutrients and flavors under difficult conditions, Sarah replied, recognizing the coded nature of their conversation. Carlos nodded approvingly. This will be very valuable for our work. The people we serve have limited resources, and many of the traditional food preparation methods have been forgotten. Your knowledge could make a real difference. They drove through countryside that was breathtakingly beautiful and obviously impoverished at the same time. Lush green mountains rose in the distance, while the immediate landscape was dotted with small farms and villages that looked like they had changed little in decades. Sarah saw children playing in the dust by the roadside, women washing clothes in streams, and men working in fields with hand tools. The camp we're going to serve is about 200 families, Carlos explained as they turned onto a rougher dirt road. Most are refugees from fighting between government forces and various rebel groups. They have been there for 6 months, maybe longer. Food is always a problem. What kind of cooking facilities do they have? Sarah asked, beginning to understand that she would need to work within very limited resources. Basic equipment only. Some large pots, wood-fired stoves, limited refrigeration. The women of the camp do most of the cooking, but they would be very interested to learn new techniques, especially ones that make the food more nutritious or filling. As they talked, Sarah began to understand the setup. The refugee camp would provide her cover for being in the area, and teaching cooking techniques would give her a legitimate reason to be preparing meals and discussing food preparation with local people. It was actually quite clever. After about an hour of driving, they arrived at the camp. It was larger than Sarah had expected, with dozens of simple shelters made from tarps and corrugated metal arranged in rough rows. Smoke from cooking fires drifted over the settlement, and she could see women preparing what looked like the morning meal for their families. The camp coordinator is expecting you, Carlos said as they parked near the largest structure in the camp, which appeared to serve as a combination community center and administrative office. Her name is Isabella Cruz. She has been here since the camp was established and knows everyone. She will help you get settled and introduce you to the women who will be most interested in learning from you. Isabella turned out to be a remarkably efficient woman in her 40s who spoke excellent English and seemed to genuinely appreciate Sarah's arrival. Within an hour, Sarah found herself settled in a small but clean shelter that would serve as both her accommodation and her workspace. We have set up cooking area for you behind the community center, Isabella explained, leading Sarah to see the facilities. The women are very excited to learn new ways of preparing food. Many of them were good cooks before they came here, but the limited ingredients and equipment make it difficult to prepare the kind of meals their families are used to. Sarah surveyed the cooking area, which consisted of several wood-burning stoves, some large pots and pans, and a work table made from rough lumber. It was basic, but she could work with it. More importantly, it was isolated enough that she could prepare special meals without attracting unwanted attention. When do you think I could start working with the women? Sarah asked. This afternoon, if you're ready. Many of them have time after the midday meal is finished and before they must prepare the evening food. They are eager to begin, Isabella replied. The rest of the morning passed quickly as Sarah unpacked her supplies and began to orient herself to her new environment. Among her belongings, she found a case containing professional cooking knives, a selection of spices, and seasonings that would allow her to prepare a wide variety of dishes, and, most importantly, a notebook containing recipes that Dr. Chun had prepared for her. The notebook appeared to contain standard recipes for feeding large groups with limited resources, but Sarah recognized the coded notations that would allow her to embed intelligence in meals. Each recipe had variations that corresponded to different types of information, from simple status reports to complex tactical instructions. As she studied the notebook, Sarah also examined her grandmother's cookbook more carefully. Elena's notations provided context for the techniques she would be using, including warnings about potential problems and suggestions for adapting the methods to different situations. One notation in particular caught Sarah's attention. Remember, Mija, the most important ingredient in any recipe is trust. The people eating your food must believe that you care about their well-being. If they trust you, they will accept whatever you give them without question. Sarah was beginning to understand that her grandmother's success as an operative had come not just from her coding skills, but from her ability to genuinely care for the people she was trying to help. The resistance fighters who had relied on Elena's coded messages had trusted her because she had actually been concerned about keeping them fed and healthy, not just about passing along intelligence. That afternoon, Sarah met with a group of 12 women who were interested in learning new cooking techniques. They ranged in age from teenage mothers to grandmothers, and all of them had stories about the homes and lives they had left behind when fighting came to their villages. Today we will work with rice, Sarah announced, choosing one of the most basic ingredients available in the camp. I will show you some methods for preparing rice that will make it more nutritious and filling, especially when you have limited other ingredients to work with. As she began demonstrating techniques for washing, seasoning, and cooking rice, Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the teaching process. The women were attentive students, asking good questions and sharing their own cooking knowledge. Several of them had techniques for stretching limited ingredients that were completely new to Sarah. But while she worked with the group, Sarah was also preparing for her real mission. Carlos had quietly informed her that the first coded meal would need to be prepared that evening. One of the women who worked with him would take the meal to the safe house, presenting it as extra food from the camp's evening preparation. The people at the safe house are also refugees, but they keep to themselves more, Carlos had explained. Isabella and the others know them but do not ask questions about why they prefer privacy. This is not unusual in a place like this, where many people have reasons to avoid attention. As the afternoon cooking lesson concluded, Sarah had successfully embedded her first coded message in a simple rice dish. Following the instructions in her notebook, she had adjusted the seasoning, cooking time, and final preparation in ways that would communicate to Harrison's team that help was coming and that they should prepare for extraction within the next few days. The woman who would carry the meal to the safe house was named Rosa, a quiet mother of 3 who helped with food distribution throughout the camp. She accepted the covered pot without comment, understanding that some questions were better not asked in a place where information could be dangerous. That evening, Sarah sat at her shelter trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Less than 2 days ago, she had been a Navy cook whose biggest concern was planning the next day's menu. Now, she was in a refugee camp in the Philippines, using skills her grandmother had taught her to communicate with trapped soldiers. The strangest part was how natural it all felt. Despite the exotic location and dangerous circumstances, the actual work of coding messages and food preparation felt familiar, almost comfortable. Her grandmother's training had been so thorough and so deeply embedded that Sarah could follow the techniques without conscious effort. Around 10 o'clock, Rosa returned with the empty pot and a small folded paper hidden in a dish towel. Sarah waited until she was alone before reading the message. Package received and understood. Morale good. Ready for next instructions. Thanks for the excellent rice. Sarah smiled at the last line, recognizing Harrison's dry sense of humor even in coded communication. The team was okay, they had received her message successfully, and they were ready to continue with the extraction plan. But as she prepared for sleep, Sarah heard sounds in the distance that reminded her of where she was and why she was there. Somewhere beyond the camp's perimeter, she could hear the occasional rumble of vehicles and what might have been gunfire from a very long way off. The fighting that had displaced all these families was still going on, and the safe house where Harrison's team was hiding was somewhere in the middle of it. Over the next 3 days, Sarah established a routine that allowed her to maintain her cover while fulfilling her real mission. She taught cooking classes in the mornings, worked on food preparation for the camp during the midday hours, and prepared coded meals for the safe house in the evenings. Each day brought new challenges and new intelligence that needed to be communicated. Harrison's team was gathering information about the terrorist organization that controlled the area, but they were also dealing with increased security measures that made their situation more dangerous. On the 4th day, Carlos approached Sarah with obvious concern. "We have a problem," he said quietly as she prepared ingredients for the evening meal. "There has been an incident at one of the checkpoints near the safe house. The terrorists are increasing their patrols and searching vehicles more thoroughly. Rosa thinks she was followed yesterday when she delivered the food." Sarah felt her stomach drop. What does that mean for the team? They're still secure for now, but the situation is becoming more difficult. "We may need to accelerate the extraction timeline," Carlos explained. "How much more time do we have?" "Perhaps 2 days, maybe 3 at the outside. After that, the risk becomes too great for everyone involved." Sarah nodded, understanding that her mission was entering its most critical phase. Everything she had learned from her grandmother, everything Dr. Chun had taught her, and everything she had discovered about herself over the past week was about to be put to the ultimate test. That evening, as she prepared what might be one of the last coded meals she would send to the safe house, Sarah allowed herself to think about the 8 men who were depending on her skills for their survival. She thought about her grandmother, who had risked everything to fight against tyranny during World War II. And she thought about herself, the ordinary cook who had discovered that sometimes ordinary people are called to do extraordinary things. The meal she prepared that night contained a most complex coded message she had attempted, including detailed instructions for the extraction plan and contingency procedures if things went wrong. As she worked, Sarah felt the presence of all the women who had come before her, the ones who had used their skills and courage to make a difference when the world needed them most. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Sarah was beginning to understand that her part in this mission was far from over. The hardest part was yet to come. Sarah woke to the sound of urgent voices and running feet outside her shelter. The pre-dawn darkness was broken by flashlight beams moving rapidly between the camp structures, and she could hear Isabella's voice calling out instructions in rapid Tagalog. Something was very wrong. She dressed quickly and stepped outside to find the camp in controlled chaos. Families were packing their belongings with practiced efficiency, loading possessions onto carts and into vehicles that had appeared from somewhere during the night. The organized nature of the activity told Sarah that this wasn't panic, but rather a well-rehearsed emergency procedure. "What's happening?" Sarah asked Isabella as the camp coordinator hurried past carrying a box of medical supplies. "We must evacuate. There was fighting last night closer than usual, and the army says this area is no longer safe. Everyone must be moved to a more secure location by midday," Isabella explained without slowing down. Carlos appeared at Sarah's elbow, his face grim. "This complicates everything," he said quietly. The safe house team was expecting extraction tomorrow night, but if the camp evacuates, we lose our cover for the operation. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she understood the implications. "What about Rosa? Can she still make the delivery today?" "That's the bigger problem," Carlos replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Rosa's husband was injured in yesterday's fighting. She left before dawn to take him to a medical clinic 3 hours away. She won't be back for days." The weight of the situation hit Sarah immediately. Harrison's team was expecting final extraction instructions that would be embedded in today's meal, but there was no one available to deliver the coded food to the safe house. Without those instructions, the SEALs wouldn't know when or where to meet the extraction team, and the entire rescue operation would fail. "Can someone else make the delivery?" Sarah asked. Carlos shook his head. Rosa was the only one who knew the location and the contact procedures. For security reasons, we couldn't risk having multiple people with that information. Besides, with the evacuation happening, anyone moving around the area independently will attract attention from both the military and the rebel forces. Sarah stared at the activity around the camp, watching families dismantle the temporary homes they had built over months of displacement. Children who had been laughing and playing just yesterday were now helping their parents pack with the resigned efficiency of people who had been forced to flee before. "There has to be another way," Sarah said, though she was beginning to realize what Carlos was going to suggest. "There is one possibility," Carlos said carefully. "The safe house is only about 5 kilometers from here. If someone took the meal directly to them, bypassing the normal delivery route." "You're talking about me going there personally," Sarah said, feeling a chill despite the tropical heat. "It's dangerous," Carlos admitted. "The area between here and there is contested territory. Both government forces and rebels patrol those roads, and strangers are always suspect. But you have humanitarian credentials, and if you carry the right supplies, you might be able to convince anyone who stops you that you're just an aid worker who got separated from your group." Sarah thought about Harrison and his team waiting in the safe house for instructions that might never come. She thought about the extraction team that was probably already positioning itself for tomorrow night's operation, counting on intelligence that only she could provide. "What would I need to do?" she asked. Carlos pulled out a hand-drawn map showing a route that wound through jungle paths and back roads. "The safe house is here, near a small village called San Rafael. The building looks like a traditional farmhouse, but there's a blue water barrel next to the front door. You approach from the north, knock 3 times, wait, then knock twice more. When someone answers, you say you're bringing food from Rosa's kitchen." Sarah studied the map, trying to memorize the route. The path looked simple enough, but she knew that what appeared straightforward on paper could be much more complicated in reality. "How long would it take to get there?" she asked. "On foot, about 2 hours if you know the way. By motorbike, maybe 40 minutes. I can arrange for you to borrow a bike for one of the families that's evacuating," Carlos offered. "And getting back? That's the problem. Once you make the delivery, you'll be on your own. The extraction team will pick up the seals tomorrow night, but they can't risk extending the operation to collect you as well. You'll need to find your own way to safety." Sarah felt the enormity of what was being asked of her settling like a weight on her shoulders. She would be leaving the relative safety of the camp to travel alone through dangerous territory, with no guarantee of making it back. But 8 men were counting on her to complete this mission. "When would I need to leave?" she asked. "Soon. The evacuation is scheduled to begin in 4 hours, and you need to be away from the camp before the military escort arrives." Too many questions would be asked about why an American aid worker is traveling alone in the opposite direction from the evacuation route. Sarah nodded, understanding that her decision needed to be made immediately. She thought about her grandmother Elena, who had made similar choices during World War II. Elena had risked capture and death to help resistance fighters, understanding that some things were worth the danger. "I'll need to prepare the coded meal first," Sarah said, "and I want to write something in case I don't make it back." "Of course," Carlos agreed. "I'll arrange for the motorbike and prepare your travel documents. If anyone stops you, you're Maria Santos with the International Food Relief Organization, and you're trying to catch up with an evacuation convoy that left earlier." Sarah spent the next hour in her cooking area, preparing what would be the most important meal of her life. The coded message embedded in the rice, vegetables, and seasoning included detailed extraction coordinates, timing information, and contingency plans for multiple scenarios. She used every technique her grandmother had taught her, every skill she had learned from Dr. Chun, and every instinct she had developed over the past week. As she worked, Sarah also wrote a letter that she left with Carlos, addressed to her family in case she didn't survive the mission. In it, she tried to explain what she had learned about her grandmother's wartime service and why she had chosen to follow in Elena's footsteps. She told them that she was proud to carry on the family tradition of service, even though she had never expected to do so. The The motorbike Carlos had arranged was an old Honda dirt bike that had seen better days, but looked reliable enough for the journey ahead. Sarah strapped the container of coated food to the back of the bike along with a small pack containing water, basic medical supplies, and her grandmother's cookbook. "Remember," Carlos said as she prepared to leave, "if you're stopped, you're lost, and trying to find your way to safety. Don't try to explain too much, and don't volunteer information. Most people in this area have learned not to ask too many questions about strangers." Sarah nodded, pulling on the helmet Carlos had provided. The weight of it reminded her that she was no longer the safe Navy cook she had been a week ago. She was now an operative in enemy territory, carrying intelligence that could save lives or cost them, depending on her success or failure. The first part of the journey went smoothly. The path led away from the camp through relatively open countryside, and Sarah encountered no one except a few farmers working in distant fields. The motorbike handled well on the dirt roads, and she began to think that maybe this wouldn't be as difficult as she had feared. But as she got closer to the contested area near San Rafael, the landscape changed. She started seeing burned buildings and abandoned vehicles, evidence of the fighting that had displaced so many families. The roads became rougher, and she had to slow down to navigate around obstacles and debris. About halfway to her destination, Sarah encountered her first checkpoint. Two government soldiers emerged from a small outpost beside the road, assault rifles at the ready. One gestured for her to stop while the other approached the bike. "Where are you going?" the soldier asked in heavily accented English, eyeing her suspiciously. "I'm trying to catch up with an evacuation convoy," Sarah replied, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I'm with the International Food Relief Organization. I got separated from my group this morning." The soldier examined her identification documents while his partner kept his weapon trained on her. Sarah's heart pounded, but she tried to project the image of a confused and slightly frightened aid worker who had simply taken a wrong turn. "This is not the evacuation route," the soldier said finally. "I know, I think I got lost. Can you tell me how to get back to the main road?" Sarah asked, hoping her confusion seemed genuine. After what felt like an eternity, the soldier handed back her documents. "Continue straight for 2 kilometers, then turn left at the village. Follow that road until you reach the highway." "Thank you so much," Sarah said, trying not to show her relief as she restarted the motorbike. But instead of following the soldier's directions back to safety, Sarah continued towards San Rafael as soon as she was out of sight of the checkpoint. She knew she was taking a huge risk, but Harrison's team was depending on her to complete the mission. The final approach to the safe house was the most nerve-wracking part of the journey. Sarah had to leave the main path and follow a series of jungle trails that were barely wide enough for the motorbike. She got lost twice, backtracking to find the correct route according to Carlos's map. When she finally spotted the farmhouse with the blue water barrel, Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with anxiety. She had found the right place, but now came the dangerous part of actually making contact with people who had every reason to be suspicious of unexpected visitors. Sarah parked the motorbike behind some trees where it wouldn't be visible from the road, then approached the house on foot. The building looked abandoned from the outside, with shuttered windows and no sign of activity. But as she got closer, she noticed that the shutters had small gaps that would allow people inside to observe anyone approaching. Following Carlos's instructions, Sarah knocked 3 times on the front door, waited 10 seconds, then knocked twice more. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard footsteps inside and the sound of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened just far enough to reveal a woman's face, suspicious and wary. "Who are you?" she asked in English. "I'm bringing food from Rose's kitchen," Sarah replied, using the code phrase Carlos had taught her. The woman's expression changed immediately. She opened the door wider and gestured for Sarah to come inside quickly. "Rosa didn't tell us anyone else was coming," she said as she relocked the door behind Sarah. "Rosa couldn't make it today. I'm her replacement," Sarah explained, following the woman into the interior of the house. The inside of the farmhouse was much different from its abandoned exterior. Sarah could see that several rooms had been converted into living spaces for multiple people, and there were signs of recent occupancy throughout. The woman led her to a kitchen area where Sarah was relieved to see Lieutenant Commander Harrison himself waiting. "Martinez," Harrison said, his surprise evident. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Bringing you dinner, sir," Sarah replied, setting down the container of coated food, "with some very important information about tomorrow night." As Harrison and his team gathered around the kitchen table, Sarah explained the situation with the camp evacuation and Rose's absence. She watched as Harrison examined the coated meal, his training allowing him to recognize the embedded intelligence even before he tasted it. "This is good intel," Harrison said after reviewing the information Sarah had brought. "But we have a problem. If the camp has been evacuated, how are you planning to get out of here?" Sarah realized that in her focus on completing the mission, she hadn't fully considered the question of her own extraction. "I was hoping you might have some suggestions about that," she admitted. Harrison exchanged glances with his team members, then looked back at Sarah with an expression that was part admiration and part concern. "Well, Martinez," he said finally, "I guess you're coming with us tomorrow night. I hope you're ready for the ride of your life." Sarah spent that night in the safe house learning what it really meant to be a soldier behind enemy lines. The farmhouse that had looked peaceful from the outside was actually a carefully fortified position, with weapons cached in hidden compartments and escape routes planned through multiple exit points. Harrison's team maintained constant watch rotations, and every sound from outside was analyzed for potential threat. "You realize this complicates everything," Staff Sergeant Rodriguez told Sarah as they sat in the kitchen during the early morning hours. "The extraction plan was designed for 8 people, not 9. Every additional person increases the risk exponentially." "I understand," Sarah replied, though she was beginning to grasp just how much danger she had put herself and the team in by coming here. "Maybe there's another way. Maybe I could wait here until after you're extracted, then make my own way out." Harrison, who had been listening from the doorway, shook his head. "Not an option, Martinez. This safe house will be compromised the moment we leave. The local contact who's been helping us will have to disappear immediately after our extraction. If you stay behind, you'll be completely on your own in hostile territory with no support network. Besides," added Thompson, the team's explosives expert, "after 7 months of your cooking, we're not leaving you behind now. We'll figure out how to get 9 people out instead of 8. Sarah felt a mixture of gratitude and guilt at Thompson's words. These men were risking their lives to include her in their escape, but she had put them in this position by her own choices. "Tell me about the extraction plan," she said. "Maybe I can help adapt it for the changed situation." Harrison spread a hand-drawn map on the kitchen table, showing the route they would take from the safe house to the extraction point. "The pickup is scheduled for 0 to 100 hours tomorrow at a clearing about 6 kilometers from here. Navy helicopters will take us out, but they can only stay on the ground for 90 seconds maximum before the risk of detection becomes too great. 6 kilometers through jungle at night, with hostile forces in the area," Williams, the communications specialist, added. "It's going to be challenging enough with our current team size." Sarah studied the map, noting the terrain they would have to cross and the potential choke points where they could be trapped if discovered. "What's the biggest risk factor?" she asked. "Time," Harrison replied without hesitation. "We have to reach the extraction point within a very narrow window. If we're even 5 minutes late, the helicopters will abort, and we'll have to wait for another opportunity that might not come. And if we're detected during the movement, we'll have to fight our way out, which could delay us enough to miss the pickup entirely," Rodriguez added. Sarah thought about the journey she had made to reach the safe house, remembering the checkpoint where she had been stopped and questioned. What if we split up? If 9 people moving together is too risky, maybe we could travel in smaller groups. "We considered that," Harrison said, "but we only have one radio for communicating with the extraction team. If the groups get separated and one doesn't make it to the pickup point, we have no way to coordinate." Sarah nodded, understanding the dilemma. She was about to suggest another approach when she remembered something from her grandmother's cookbook. Elena had written about a technique used during World War II for coordinating the movements of multiple resistance groups without radio communication. What if we use coded signals? Sarah asked. Something that would allow the groups to communicate position and status without electronic equipment? Harrison raised an eyebrow. What kind of coded signals? Sarah pulled out her grandmother's cookbook and found the section she was looking for. My grandmother wrote about using cooking smoke to send messages between resistance groups. Different types of fuel create different colored smoke, and the timing of the signals can communicate specific information. Interesting, but we can't exactly build cooking fires in the jungle during a stealth operation, Williams pointed out. Not cooking fires, but what about emergency flares? Sarah suggested. Military flares come in different colors, and if we establish a simple code, we could use them to coordinate movement between groups. Harrison considered this for a moment, then turned to his weapons specialist. Jackson, what do we have for flares? Jackson checked their equipment inventory. 6 red, for green, 2 white. Standard emergency signaling equipment. That could work, Harrison said slowly. If we split into 3 groups of 3, each group carries flares and moves along parallel routes toward the extraction point. If one group encounters trouble, they signal with a red flare. Green means all clear and continuing toward objective. White means arrival at extraction point. Sarah felt a surge of excitement as she realized her contribution might actually help solve their problem. The groups could leapfrog past each other, with the lead group signaling all clear before the next group advances. It would slow down the overall movement, but it might be safer than trying to move 9 people together. Plus, if one group is compromised, the others still have a chance to make the extraction, Rodriguez added, warming to the idea. Harrison studied the map again, this time marking potential routes for 3 separate groups. Martinez, you go with Jackson and Thompson. Rodriguez, Williams, and Chun form the second group. The rest of us take the third route. Each group follows a different path, but converges on the extraction point. They spent the rest of the morning refining the plan, establishing the flare codes, and rehearsing the timing of the movements. Sarah found herself caught up in the tactical planning in a way she had never experienced before. Her suggestion about the coded signals had evolved into a complete operational modification, and the team was treating her as a full partner in the planning process. As afternoon approached, the team began final preparations for the night's operation. Weapons were cleaned and checked, equipment was distributed among the team members, and everyone reviewed their assigned routes one more time. Sarah was given basic tactical gear, including a radio headset that would allow her to stay in contact with Jackson and Thompson during their movement. Remember, Harrison told her as they prepared to move out, tonight you're not a cook or an intelligence specialist. You're a member of this team, and we depend on each other to get everyone home safely. Trust your instincts, follow Jackson's lead, and don't hesitate to use whatever skills you have if the situation requires it. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once again. But this time it was different. She wasn't just supporting the team from a distance. She was part of the team, and their success or failure would depend partly on her performance under pressure. As darkness fell, the 3 groups prepared to leave the safe house at staggered intervals. Harrison's group would depart first, taking the most direct route to the extraction point and serving as the advance element. Sarah's group would follow 30 minutes later, using a longer but potentially safer path through denser jungle. Rodriguez's group would bring up the rear, watching for any signs of pursuit from the safe house area. Before they separated, Harrison gathered everyone together for final instructions. This has been a successful mission, he told them. We gathered the intelligence we were sent to collect, and thanks to Martinez here, we managed to communicate that information back to headquarters despite some unexpected complications. Now we just need to get home in one piece. What about the safe house? Sarah asked. What happens to the people who helped us? They'll be evacuated within hours of our departure, Harrison assured her. Our extraction is just the beginning of a larger operation to shut down this entire terrorist network. The intelligence we gathered will be used to protect a lot of innocent people. Sarah felt a sense of completion at Harrison's words. The mission that had begun with her unconsciously embedding codes in the team's meals was ending with her as a full participant in their escape. Her grandmother's legacy had carried her further than she had ever imagined possible. At precisely 10:30 p.m., Harrison's group slipped out of the safe house and disappeared into the jungle. Sarah watched them go, knowing that the next time she saw them would be at the extraction point, assuming everything went according to plan. 30 minutes later, it was her turn. Jackson led the way as Sarah and Thompson followed single file along a narrow trail that wound through dense vegetation. The jungle at night was a completely different environment than during the day. Every sound seemed amplified, from the rustle of leaves to the distant calls of nocturnal animals. Sarah found herself jumping at noises that Jackson and Thompson seemed to ignore completely. They had been moving for about an hour when Jackson suddenly raised his hand, signaling for the group to stop. In the distance, Sarah could hear voices and the sound of vehicles moving along a road that paralleled their route. Jackson motioned for them to take cover behind a fallen tree while they waited for the patrol to pass. As they crouched in the darkness, Sarah felt her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid it might give away their position. This was what real military operations were like, she realized. Not the controlled environment of the ship's galley where her biggest worry was timing the preparation of different dishes, but a situation where a single mistake could mean capture or death for all of them. The patrol eventually moved on, and Jackson's group continued their movement toward the extraction point. They encountered 2 more close calls during the night. Once when they had to cross an open area where they were temporarily exposed, and again when they heard helicopters overhead that turned out to be unrelated to their operation. With 15 minutes to spare before the scheduled pickup time, Jackson's group reached their assigned position near the extraction point. They were the second group to arrive. Harrison's team was already in position and had signaled their successful arrival with a white flare 20 minutes earlier. Rodriguez's group was still en route, but they were cutting it close. The extraction helicopters would arrive in exactly 12 minutes, and without the third group, the mission would be incomplete. Sarah found herself watching the jungle for any sign of Rodriguez's team, willing them to appear before time ran out. At 8 minutes to extraction, she saw a green flare in the distance, indicating that the final group was approaching and all clear. At 5 minutes to extraction, Rodriguez, Williams, and Chin emerged from the jungle and took their positions around the landing zone. The entire team had made it safely to the extraction point with time to spare. The sound of approaching helicopters filled the night air at exactly 2 a.m., and Sarah felt a surge of relief as she saw the dark shapes of 2 Navy aircraft settling into the clearing. The extraction took less than 60 seconds, with the team boarding quickly and efficiently while the helicopter's engines remained running. As Sarah strapped herself in her seat and felt the helicopter lift off, she looked down at the jungle below, where she had spent the most intense week of her life. Somewhere down there, families in refugee camps were sleeping, probably unaware that their safety had been improved by intelligence gathered through coded meals prepared by a Navy cook who had discovered her extraordinary heritage. 6 hours later, Sarah found herself back aboard a Navy ship, this time as a passenger rather than a crew member. Dr. Chen was waiting for her with a full debriefing team, but also with news that Sarah's part in the operation had been even more significant than she had realized. The intelligence your team gathered led to the disruption of a major terrorist operation, Chen explained. 3 camps were shut down, 47 hostages were freed, and a significant weapons cache was seized. None of that would have been possible without the communication system you maintain with the team. Sarah thought about her grandmother, Elena, who had carried out similar operations during World War II, but had never been able to talk about them. The cookbook that Elena had left for her contained not just recipes and coding techniques, but also a tradition of service that had passed from one generation to the next. "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "Now you get to choose," Chen replied. You can return to your regular duties as a Navy cook, and this entire operation will remain classified. Or you can consider a different kind of career, one that would make use of the skills you've discovered you have. Sarah looked out at the ocean, thinking about the ordinary life she had led just a week ago and the extraordinary experiences that had shown her what she was capable of when the situation demanded it. She thought about the 8 men who had trusted her with their lives, and about the refugee families who were safer because of the mission they had completed together. "I think my grandmother would want me to be ready if I'm needed again," Sarah said finally. "But I also think she'd want me to remember that the most important part of any mission is taking care of the people who depend on you." Chin smiled. "I think she'd be very proud of what you've accomplished." As Sarah prepared to return to her ship and her regular duties, she carried with her the knowledge that she was part of a tradition that stretched back generations. She had learned that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when called upon, and that sometimes the most important skills are the ones passed down quietly from one generation to the next. The cook who had thought she was just preparing meals had discovered that she was capable of much more, and that discovery would stay with her for the rest of her life. Whether she would be called upon to use those skills again remained to be seen, but she would be ready if the time came. After all, she was her grandmother's granddaughter, and some traditions are too important to let die.